All right, coming to you from lovely Detroit here at Kubecon 2022, and I'm here with Alex Jones from Canonical. So Alex, what do you do at Canonical?
I'm the engineering director there, and I manage two different distributions of Kubernetes, so microcates and charmcates. And on top of that, I also manage our relationships with our cloud partners. So they consume more often than not Ubuntu, and when they do that, they might need to tailor it in a particular way to optimize their case. So I advise in that relationship, and I help to push them in the right direction for that.
So as you pointed out when I went to the booth, you don't have the word Ubuntu anywhere there. So what does that signify then for the company and the strategy?
I think that Ubuntu casts a long shadow, right? It's an incredibly popular operating system, but the flip side of that is also that that's what we're known for. And so I think that what we're trying to do strategically is to differentiate and say, hey, that's a part of our heritage, that's a great part we should celebrate, but we also have other innovations on other products that we really want to celebrate and show you. And so seeing that we've now got Canonical Kubernetes up there and everyone can see that makes me really proud because it shows the next generation of what we're doing and bringing to the community.
So you talked about being the engineering director for Kubernetes. I remember back in the day you had the engineering director for server and for client. And so how else, so you've got engineering for what you're doing. Are there other ancillary engineering? Do you have one for the edge or do you have?
It's a good question. I mean, to be quite honest, it's a unique position because Kubernetes is both a product, but it's also a substrate, right? So yeah, it's interesting to ask that question because the real answer is that we tend to have our verticals based on products, right? You'd be an engineering director for OpenStack, an engineering director for LXD, for example. Why I think this is a unique role is because we didn't actually build upstream Kubernetes, but we do add to it. So I get the opportunity to work with upstream and the community very heavily, which makes this quite a role that is of two halves, right? You have one, the commercial side of how do you bring this into the customers with a strong go-to-market, but then also how do you make sure that you are giving back to the community and ensuring the life cycle and the longevity of the project.
And then you mentioned two distros. Microcate's the one I'm aware of, and then there's Charm's distro?
Charm Kubernetes, yes.
And so what would be the difference at a high level between those? When do you use one and the other?
Right, so I think that there's a continuum here, right? So effectively microcates is the zero ops, everything from your local computer, you can scale it up to n nodes, and that's great. You can grow with the Kubernetes.
So you'd run it locally on your laptop?
On your laptop, on your XPS 13, you can learn how Kubernetes works, and then you might be adventurous and say, I feel comfortable with that, I'm going to put 500 nodes in, and suddenly you've now got a working, operational, production grade cluster. Charm Kubernetes, on the other hand, would be when firstly you want to have something that's HA. So you distribute it with an HA key value store in the back end. It's got easy RSA, it's got all these integrations with these well-known functional capabilities that give you that reassurance that everything is production grade. But on top of that it has Charms, which comes from the whole Juju ecosystem of effectively managed operators. And that's really where I think the differentiator is.
So if people are new to this space, maybe not so comfortable with Kubernetes, would microcates be a better one to start? Is that still a little daunting? Which distro would work, or how would they go about it?
I think it's all pretty daunting because the expectation is to rapidly ramp up and become some sort of guru of not only infrastructure, networking, containerization, and application delivery. So yeah, microcates keeps it simple because you can start and stop it with system CTO. So it's familiar, right? If I freak out and I say, well actually I just stopped on my computer, system CTL stop, and microcates stop. So it's really nice and it's familiar in that it's in the friendly aquarium of running inside of Ubuntu as a snap.
And so who would be the people who would use it? Would they be people who have traditionally used Ubuntu? If I'm an ops person trying to get into the whole wild and wacky world of cloud and Kubernetes, what would be the way that I would go about getting in using microcates or other things?
So the nice thing about microcates is because we have the tight integration with Snap, it's just a Snap install microcates for anyone, anywhere, anytime.
And maybe for the folks, can you explain snaps? That's probably new for a lot of folks.
So if you've heard of apt, if you haven't, that's fine. Basically, Snap, apt, and Flatpak, and many others are all packaging systems. What it enables you to do is get that piece of code onto your computer lightning fast and as soon as command. What's really interesting about it is it's not that you're just pulling it from some static server. Is that we maintain those upstream projects and we push revisions to them daily. So when you do snap install microcates, it pulls down that code and unpacks it and executes it on your computer.
Okay. And so would it be then, these are operators using it, developers, or you have both? Do you have a developer side and an app
Well,
side?
I think that's a really good question because the story actually tends to differentiate based on the organization. Some organizations you have a one-stop shop. The developer is also kind of a DevOps and SRE engineer responsible for maintaining their application. However, I think that more often than not, what we're seeing is that operational folks are dipping their toes into the water. Okay, I'm getting comfortable with my interface. I feel like I could actually recommend this to a team member. And so what they'll end up doing is they'll write a little bit of code, like a little bit of a shell script or instructor saying, this is so easy, you could do it too. So you could do a snap install microcase and deploy your traditional Java-based application in a container. So there's like a proliferation effect we're seeing where the ops people start, they're like, this is so easy, I want to tell everybody about it. And then developers join in because they know that it's easy to go with the flow. If the ops people already buy into it, they're like, sure, we'll take a look at it. And then it goes on from there. So
you mentioned, we were talking before, and you've been at vendors, obviously, where you are, but you've also been on the customer side, a lot of financial places. So what drew you to Canonical as far as your own pain points that you've known and the stuff that's been tough for you, and then to be on this side? What drew you there? And then also, what wisdom do you have, having been on the customer side?
Yeah.
What are pain points you've had to deal with?
I think that some of the pain points from an end user perspective are the pace that open source software is rapidly developing. Often the adoption of that software is already out of date by the time it has been put into production. I mean, the Kubernetes project is a good example. It's a yearly update cycle, and working at a fintech or a telco or an energy company, it's simply not tenable because of some contracts you have in place and the support agreements. So that's a real challenge. In terms of what I enjoy about Canonical is it's an incredibly collegiate environment, right? It feels very academic in that there are rigorous discussions about the value of what we're doing and why we're doing it. And there's a real sort of sense of the soul of the company being put into products, and we really evaluate what that's doing. I think Mark Shuttleworth once said it best, is we want to become the trusted supplier of open source. And that comes also to Kubernetes. We see that everyone's using it, but the upstream and all the add-ons and all the ecosystem around it, it's fragmented and there are different versions. What we do best is packaging open source and delivering it to people. And so naturally that's how we get into the space.
So just to end with going back, putting your former customer hat on, when you were trying to get up to speed, what did you see as the main speed bumps, or if you're trying to take a group within a company and say, hey, we're going cloud native, or we're using DevOps or whatever, there's got to be some were excited, some were scared to death. How was that transformation when you were on that side of the world?
I think that the term itself is nebulous. It always feels like there's a state you need to get to, so you're constantly looking for that checkbox.
Which one? Cloud native?
Yeah, right. So it's sort of like, oh, have I done it now? I've got a Docker container. Is that cloud native? Or do I need observability? Do I need metrics? Does that make me cloud native? So it's a very innocuous term. And I think one of the challenges for me was also getting started, it was information overload. It's even more so now because the whole experience of what is a container is almost like a side note in getting to Kubernetes. So I think we kind of bypass a lot of that critical information and pace that journey. Historically, there would be Docker Compose, and you could walk along that fairly sequentially to understand what you're doing. You were isolating your process, wrapping that, and then being able to manage that with some configuration. We're now having such a rapid journey that many people are feeling a little bit overwhelmed and lost along.
So did you come up from the engineering side or from the developer side, or kind of both?
So I came up from more of the ops side. So DevOps was just being coined as a term when I started working in this space. So I cared a lot about the resiliency of services, looking at how you're doing things with failover, with keep alives on VMs. Docker Compose was the initial entry point for me, so looking at how we had container isolation, and then Kubernetes came along after Deos, which was a preliminary platform.
Oh yes, which got bought by Microsoft.
Right, and then we used heavily we were using Mesos, so Mesosphere, and we invested into Mesosphere, and eventually we pivoted away from that distributed operating system to a Kubernetes model.
Very cool. Well, I appreciate this, both sides of the view, as being on the vendor and for being a customer. So Alex Jones, thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks.